This week has been dominated in particular by the selection of the rather motley crew, the extraordinary bunch that the incoming president, the president-elect, has chosen to select in terms of his cabinet. We've seen a man, an alleged sex trafficker for the most senior law position in the country, which is, of course, his Attorney General. And now we have, in terms of the president-elect's energy pick, Chris Wright, an oil executive, staunch defender of fossil fuels, known for drinking fracking fluid that includes bleach on camera to prove that it is safe, a man who has caused, yes, you heard me right, what is it with Trump and bleach? It seems to come up a lot, doesn't it? A man who has called net zero a sinister goal and a well-known climate skeptic. Indeed, he has filed, Mr. Martin, lawsuits opposing climate disclosure rules. He's called climate activist alarmist. He's likened efforts by Democrats to combat climate change as Soviet-style communism. As I said in 2019, he made headlines when he drank a fracking fluid cocktail containing a collection of chemicals which he knocked back with colleagues after toasting the, quotes, long lives and healthier lives of billions of people all around the world from oil and gas. And indeed, last year, he was briefly censored by LinkedIn for posting a video in which he said, quotes, there is no climate crisis and we're not in the midst of an energy transition either. This is Mr. Trump's pick to be his energy secretary for the next 4 years, doubtless with profound implications for the climate globally, but certainly for American energy policy. And bringing it back home for a moment as well, I cannot think of a time when UK government policy and US government policy in the modern era has been quite so at variance in terms of climate change in particular, because, or indeed any other element of policy, because we have had just this week the Prime Minister go to COP in Baku in Azerbaijan, flanked by his climate secretary, Ed Miliband, who has basically staked much of his political career now on this issue, saying that not only does this government still believe this to be a matter of central political importance, but also that it intends to try and achieve the energy transition and get to cleaner energy and decarbonise more quickly than even the plans were before, making those targets even more stringent on British industry and British consumers and so on. Now, the Prime Minister says that that isn't going to have an effect on individuals. Lots of analysts and experts would beg to differ on that. But nonetheless, the point remains that there is a gaping gulf, an enormous gulf now, between energy policy, the views on net zero and climate, between the British government, and it has to be said, most Western European governments, and the United States government. And that poses real questions for what that means in terms of British industrial policy, what it means in terms of British energy policy, and so on. And who is right, Mr. Trump or the British government? That's something we'll be putting to a cabinet minister very shortly. And I want your views on what this pick of Mr. Martin by Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, means. It does really. I mean, with the prospect of the United States withdrawing once again from the Paris Climate Accords, is there any hope whatsoever for action on climate change? 0345 6060 973, 0345 6060 973, and of course text and WhatsApp on 84850. First though, let's talk to Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. Natasha, it feels like the Trump presidency, it is honing into view, isn't it? And it is going to be, I mean, let's just take energy policy for a start. What a profound difference between, say, Ed Miliband and Mr. Trump's energy pick, Mr. Martin.
Good morning, Lewis. Yes, I mean, climate change and energy policy could be now the biggest, the sharpest edge between number 10 and the White House in just 6 months' time. Under the UK and the US, just like you've just been outlining, absolutely could not be further apart on climate change and energy. And obviously, number 10, Downing Street, obviously insisting, of course, that they'll work with whoever the president-elect wants to put in the White House, because, of course, they have to. But I think this is going to be really where the challenge will come for Keir Starmer, Ed Miliband, and indeed the entire government. They say they want to work with anybody. The last sort of 2 or 3 weeks since President Trump, we found that he was going back to the White House. Their strategy has very much been hug Donald Trump, hug him close, keep your enemies closer. That seems to be the sort of strategy that they've been going with, trying to insist that actually it doesn't matter, even if their allies aren't going to be in the White House for much longer, that they will make it work. And of course, the special relationship, so many diplomats have been sort of telling me over the past couple of weeks, will of course endure. It endured throughout 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency before. And of course, we will, still work together no matter what. But it's going to be even harder to do when you've got somebody like Chris Wright, who has such extreme views, so different to the kind of things that Ed Miliband and Keir Starmer believe. You saw Keir Starmer off to COP this week, like I say, not just with his energy secretary, but with a whole string of ministers making that trip. And actually, the talks in COP in Baku have somewhat stalled over the last few weeks. And some people I've been speaking to are pointing to the fact that Donald Trump's presidency and the election there has slightly stalled talks on the world stage because of the uncertainty of what President Trump and his new team is going to bring to climate change. Ed Miliband's team, Keir Starmer's team, very much convinced that this isn't going to distract from their net zero intentions. But I think Keir Starmer himself got a little bit unstuck on this earlier this week. He sort of announced these new plans to slash emissions by even further, setting himself a new target, but got into a little bit of a sticky wicket when he didn't really say what the country was going to have to do to meet these targets, whether that's going to mean eating less meat, as the Climate Change Committee itself suggests, whether that's going to mean less flying. And he's getting a little bit of flack in some of the Sunday newspapers today for the amount of delegates that he's sending over to these COP climate change summits. And, this government's one of the first things they did was reverse Liz Truss's fracking policy, rip up the ban on onshore wind. Those are some very significant things that this government would like to be remembered for. Keir Starmer says we need to go further and faster on net zero. They are going to run up into a lot of resistance on this, and it's going to be a real test of the special relationship, a real test of the UK diplomacy about whether they can make that work on the world stage.
But also, Natasha, in terms of Ed Miliband's position in particular, I mean, we've got an energy secretary here who is well known for, I mean, some criticise him from almost an evangelism on the subject, that this is the central part of his politics now. We've got, as you say, Mr. Wright in the United States, who is not only saying that we don't need to worry about net zero, but is actually basically saying that, as echoing what Mr. Trump has said in the past, that it's basically a sort of conspiracy and alarmist from climate activists. Meanwhile, you've got the British government saying we need to go faster than ever before. Do you think that it destabilises Miliband's position in particular?
It could do. It depends on which way Donald Trump decides to go with his policy. And, if he is indeed intending on a sort of more isolationist approach, then perhaps we will be slightly protected from this. And, that's one of the reasons why you sort of mentioned in your talk up about about Keir Starmer wanting to speak to China's president, potentially on the sidelines of the G20 summit. And that's something that I think the reason why the government want to do this is sort of two or three fold, but mainly trade, and mainly on renewables, mainly on discussion about whether we can access that new sort of technology from China as opposed to from the US. Actually, this could make things easier and opening up in tons of other markets.
But the US won't be happy about that either. I mean, this is why all roads always lead back to Trump in the end in the White House, because we might want a rapprochement with China. But look what happened to the Conservative governments when they wanted to have Huawei have a bigger role in Britain's infrastructure and telecoms and so on. And even the Trump administration and Biden administration said, no, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, for Starmer's team to be going so differently on so many issues of foreign policy will be a concern to a lot of people. Did
you read that thing at the weekend about Trump sort of ringing Starmer up just on his mobile completely randomly, and they don't quite know how to deal with it?
Well, actually, I asked Number 10 about that at the time, because they put out a picture of Keir Starmer talking to Trump on the mobile, and that's not the way that these calls usually go, and they sort of dismissed it at the time. That's not how they go, because they're not safe lines. They are always done on a landline. So that did sort of prick my attention when I sort of saw it. And that is classic Donald Trump. He is going to be doing things entirely differently to how they've been done for the past 4 years.